What are the implications of a second Virgo new moon in the past 30 days? Yes, that's right. We get a do-over. The last one on September 22nd involved an easygoing grand trine. This time, it's way more serious. It feels like the cosmic intelligence has something important to say. Hey there, Truth Seeker. Welcome to the Starkittens community where we discuss 13-sign astrology. Are you in alignment with your divine design? Do you want to master the metaphysical reality? Open the doors of perception. Each planetary body is an archetype, a template, if you will, that helps us interpret human behavior in the world around us. The more awake and aware we are, the more synchronicity will show up in your life. Our focus today is the October new moon forming a busy 5-way stellium in Virgo, a momentous grand cross involving Pluto, Jupiter, and Chiron. To help us reach more souls with this important message, please like, share, and subscribe. There's a lot going on, so let's jump in. Kia ora, David.
Kia ora.
There is a lot going on indeed, and I'll just give one very quick overview that this new moon occurring on the 22nd of October here in New Zealand at 1:25 a.m. in the morning, and the sun and moon are sitting at 34 degrees Virgo. What is the overview today?
Well, I think when I first saw the chart, what struck me was just how complex this particular lunation is. And in 40 years of astrology readings and chart interpretation, it would have to be right up there as one of the most difficult to give a reading on. And the reason for that is these 9 planetary bodies. There are 9, no less than 9 planetary bodies have been activated at this new moon. And of course, the number 9 signifies completion and perfection. It encompasses all numbers. And Nikola Tesla had a lot to say about the 369 key code and how that particular combination unlocks a cosmic blueprint. So here we are, we've got 9 planetary bodies. And what we're also experiencing is a continuation of the completion energy we spoke of in our prior Pisces full moon podcast. We spent a lot of time talking about dissolution and emergence, the ending of cycles and the beginning of something new. 9, of course, in the tarot, for those followers, is the Hermit. That's in the Major Arcana and the Rider-Waite deck. And that card speaks of wisdom through introspection. Mindfulness and meditation, of course, are always important at new moons because it is through spending some time going inward and introspecting and contemplating and being mindful and meditative. It is in that state that we will interpret and pick up for us individually what it is that's dissolving and what's emerging within both our own lives, but also the collective as well. As you mentioned, this is also the second Virgo new moon in the past month. Of course, for followers of 13-sign astrology as we are, this is because the size of Virgo, where the sun is currently transiting, is 44. It takes 44 days. So the sun moves at 1 degree per day, thereabouts. So it takes actually more than the traditional 30 days to move through. So that's why we get 2 new moons. Sometimes, as you discussed before, there's also 2 full moons. There's always 2 lunations, of course, as the sun goes through the sign of Virgo, because it takes that 44 days, which is the true position of the sun. This second new moon, for me anyway, illustrates why coming into alignment with the true position of the sun and each of the planetary bodies helps us to tune into and accurately hear from the universal intelligence, the source consciousness, without distortion and white noise. With a second Virgo new moon, clearly source has something to say that we need to hear and act upon as individuals and as a collective. Humanity is on notice, and I don't think that that's being too extreme, as we'll establish later through the discussion. With so much happening, I think it's probably easiest and best to just tease out and look at just a few of the individual aspects of those nine planetary bodies that are in focus, which is what we'll do shortly.
Helps if I am unmuted as well. There's lots of building work going around, so we have to mute ourselves so there's not too much background noise. Of course, I walked through life for close to 35 years thinking that my sun was in Libra, but by being introduced by you, David, to the 13 sign astrology, and I say this almost every time, grab an application on your smartphone. The one I use is Night Sky. There's many, many others, and you point it up and you will see clearly that some of the planetary bodies we're talking about today, for example, Pluto, has just entered Capricorn, whereas the followers of 12th sign, where every constellation is beautiful, divided in just 30 degrees, they say that Pluto has entered Aquarius. So totally different energies, but we get two lunations in Virgo because Virgo is the largest constellation in the night sky, and the smallest I think might be Cancer. I know, of course not. The smallest is Scorpio, with only 7 days that it takes the sun to travel through that one. But today we are focusing very much on Virgo and also the stellium. So a stellium is lots of planetary bodies close together, and today we are going to discuss, I believe, 5 of them. So what would you like to say about this new moon energy in Virgo, David?
Yeah, let's just go back and level set about. I mean, the first place to start, or the core of this reading, is of course the new moon in Virgo, and all the other planetary bodies play a secondary role, but they are just as important. But we'll start with the Virgo energy, and we're not going to spend, or I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this because it's the second Virgo new moon in the past 30 days. The prior one was on September the 22nd. Virgo is the 6th constellation. So there we get that 6-9 energy, that 3-6-9 energy operating and coming through again. It's the 6th constellation and thus the 6th house. And again, we see, we remember, of course, what we talked about last time with Virgo is that this Virgo energy is the domain of work, health, and well-being. 3 particular areas that we interpret as Virgo is relating to work, health, and well-being. We did a massive deep dive into the importance and role of Virgo in that September 22 podcast, and it's called We're on the Cusp. So we encourage you to please go back and listen to that. The September 22nd new moon was also a solar eclipse, which heightened and amplified its messages. So it was a pretty important entree, if you like, to what's happening at this new moon. Last time there was a powerful grand trine, which signaled imminent transformation, technological disruption, evolving workplace paradigms, and shifts in healthcare systems. A trine is favorable. It's a tailwind. And if you like the surfing analogies or water analogies, it's an easy wave to ride. However, this Virgo new moon is a grand cross, which means that it's difficult, it's challenging, and it sure as packs a punch. It's a wake-up call. The September 22nd eclipse, the last Virgo new moon, only 30 days ago, at the time of this, of course, being October 22nd, the September 22 eclipse in its planetary aspects represented, as we interpreted it, a cosmic reset. There was a triggering of sudden changes and new beginnings, and the revelation of hidden truths, work, health, and in the areas of Virgo, which are work, health, and well-being. The previous Virgo new moon urged us as individuals and institutions to confront the rapid developments that are taking place in AI, in automation, in robotics, and in outsourcing. Those are the areas of work relating to Virgo, and those are the things that are happening in terms of disruption and change. All of those areas, AI, automation, robotics, outsourcing, will totally upend our ideas about work. So there's a lot in play here in this Virgo house. But of course, also, we spoke last time and we were warned even through the astrological interpretation that the healthcare systems, which again is also a part of that Virgo domain, are increasingly themselves becoming automated, digitized, and commercialized through the use of data mining, applications, and disruptive forces, of course, like mRNA, gene editing, bio, and nanotechnologies. The disruption to Virgo is coming through the position of Uranus at that time, and currently still Uranus moves quite slowly through the night sky, and the powerful forces that we're confronting and dealing with as individuals and collectively are also coming via that Pluto energy, which again is a slow mover. So we've got the Pluto and the Uranian themes coming through in terms of power and disruption and the massive forces that are taking place here. And we've got this context of this kind of playground, if you like, or sandpit or stage, whichever words you use, that everything that is happening in terms of disruption in that Virgo energies is in the area of work and then the area of healthcare, which ultimately affects our well-being.
And just to give a little bit of a background on that, so Uranus is sitting in Taurus, Taurus being another earth sign just like Virgo, and Pluto is sitting in Capricorn, the third and final earth sign as well. So it's interesting how these are all very much very important at this time. Let's talk about this stellium in Virgo. First off, we will talk about Haumea, and we have discussed Haumea before, but not that much yet. So please refresh our memories, and I'm sure you'll give us some more information today.
Yeah, Haumea, we did in fact do quite a deep dive into Haumea. I went back and looked at our previous podcasts. That was February the 28th, 2025. That podcast was called Something Big is Coming, Once in 11,400 Year Event. And we spoke very much at that time that the position of Haumea was incredibly rare, and it had a lot of potency about it. And here we are again, we're touching on this time a new moon involving Haumea. So we encourage you to go back if you want to do, peel back the layers on Haumea. That's February 28, 2025. Something Big is Coming was the name of that podcast. So I'll only briefly touch on it today, otherwise we'll be here forever talking about all 9 energies. Haumea teaches us about the evolutionary leap from matter to spirit. The square of Pluto to Haumea back then in February, of course, Pluto's now moved. Haumea is pretty much in the same position, but Pluto's moved. So that square of Pluto and Haumea has no longer in play, if you like. But at the time that we spoke about that, it gave us a context for what that transition from matter to spirit, or Kali Yuga to Sat Yuga, actually means in practical terms, what it means to move from the age of darkness to or materialism to the lightness of spirit. There are great shifts occurring in the institutions, as we've just touched on before, of the institutions of work and healthcare, and there's an enormous amount of disruption going on in Virgo's domain, being driven by the vectors of AI, of robotics, of automation, of outsourcing, and big data, biotechnologies, gene editing, GMOs. All of those that I've just listed or itemized are actually to do with control systems, and they're also to do with the Piscean the dissolution and the ending of the Piscean age. We know about Pisces giving way to Aquarius, the age of Aquarius. There's a number of different terms that commentators, that mystics, that people use to describe these changes of the ages, and I've touched on a few of them there. As I said, Kala Yuga to Sat Yuga, darkness and materialism to lightness of spirit. The fourth turning is another one that we hear quite a lot about. We are definitely in this phase of dissolution of big institutions, and a lot of them are to do with the areas of Virgo. So where does Haumea come into this? Well, Haumea as a Hawaiian myth reminds us that we should connect with and be comfortable with the cycles of birth, of equilibrium and death, that of Shiva, Brahma and Vishnu, the Trimurti, or three forms of creation. And we spoke a lot about those three forms of creation, or those three cycles of reality, in our prior podcast of October 6th, which was called Time and Tide, Wait for No One. Haumea rules over fertility and childbirth. She possessed a magic stick from the Malachi tree that would enable her to conjure up fish and other edibles for people around her, which links her to a never-failing food supply, contingent upon us, of course, humanity, honouring her. You see, in the Hawaiian system of mythology, Haumea is revered, and because she is revered and honoured, she continues to use the stick to create this abundance, in this case of fish and other edibles. The astrology of Haumea is also related to the love of the natural world, Earth, and the fecundity of the Earth, which is her inherent ability to create abundance for all who dwell upon her. The archetype of Haumea thus signals profound connection with nature, and it implies that we therefore have a connection with source consciousness. If we connect with Mother Nature, we are connecting also via her with source consciousness. And we are also connecting to the Earth cycle. So if we're connecting to 13 sign astrology and we're connecting to the Earth, we're tapping into two very powerful cycles that permeate everything that we do, and how we function best is to be aligned with the cosmic rhythm and to be aligned with the rhythms of the Earth. So Haumea is talking about that Earth rhythm, that Earth cycles, if you like, which is quite slow. It has a slow wave form, is how I like to describe it. But Haumea's mythology is also about us living ethically in respect of resources. So treating the earth with respect and understanding that what we consume came from somewhere and it has to go somewhere as well. See, often we get just stuck with the consumption phase and we forget about the extraction and the mining, the production, and we also forget about the waste and the recycling and what happens to it once we've discarded. I'm talking about packaging and these sorts of things. So Haumea's myth is tied up with being connected to the earth, of treating her with respect, and of telling the truth too, of being unafraid of profound honesty as part of that Haumea consciousness. Haumea asks us to draw on our innate understanding of nature that of course is within us. We are standing on the earth. We are eating from the earth's abundance. We are part of this planetary body, and so therefore we are, whether we accept it or not, intimately connected with her. And Haumea's myth reminds us that that connection should function as an innate moral compass that guides our behavior when it comes to resources. But we don't always act like that. Sometimes we act like the earth doesn't matter. Sometimes we act like we're separate from her, but that's not true. You see, the earth sustains us, and she is the source of our inner strength, and she helps us with our spiritual connection. Haumea talks about being adaptable and versatile when we're living on this planet as well. So she's got a number of different messages, but they're quite specific. So if Haumea represents the birthing process, therefore, in the respect of the areas of Virgo which are dissolving or which are shifting around because of the influences of Saturn and Pluto and Uranus particularly, then the birthing can also represent or be seen as a metaphor for the birthing of new ideas, for new solutions, for new innovations. When it comes to, okay, so if Virgo's domains of health and work are breaking down, then what is the way that we can move forward? What's a way? What are some ideas that we can bring to the table individually and collectively to help us move through this time of transition? When we think also about healthcare, an area that's very important to you, Sana, and we're talking about this just in the last few days of the differences between allopathic medicine and alternative remedies. A lot of those alternative remedies, a lot of the what's good for us, which may in fact just be clean water and fresh air and sitting in the sun, but beyond that, what is found on this planet in terms of the botanicals and the natural remedies is vast and incredible. And I don't think that humanity has got anywhere near tapping the depth of the wisdom that is contained on the earth. And yet, when we talk about healthcare, when we talk about allopathic, we're talking about usually pharmaceuticals and big pharma and control systems. And when we're talking about alternative remedies, we're talking about natural, going the natural way. I think there's a combination of the two that works best. But what Haumea's energy is saying is don't forget that there are natural remedies, that it isn't just about the big institutions and the big corporations and the pharmaceutical system and the drug stores and all of that. There's also other ways of looking at healthcare as well. So we need to also, she has a warning for us, Haumea, that organic abundance comes from her. So we need to be aware in this time of disruption of synthetic, genetically engineered alternatives, because some of those are not great for us. Some of them we don't have a choice to eat. They may be so embedded in the food chain that we don't have a choice. But we need to have a consciousness and awareness. So Haumea is bringing us to that place to be present to what's going into our bodies, to be present to the way we're dealing with her and her resources, to be present to the fact that we are not separate from the earth and we can't behave like that. We are actually part of the earth and her ecosystems, and we have a profound effect on those ecosystems. We invite you to listen to our April 28, 2025 podcast called The Solar New Year Starts Now, Rear Grand Cross in Aries, where we touched again on this energy of Haumea.
Thank you. And it's very awesome that you are drawing the audience back to previous podcasts that we've done and just kind of highlighting that we have spoken about certain topics before. And if you would like to know more about that, then we have highlighted a chapter for you where to go. Just wanted to highlight what you were talking about regarding the alternative. Isn't it horrible that we call them alternative options? It's the things that have been around way longer than the allopathic medicine. But my goal as a mum for my children is that when they have, when they feel a fever coming up, that they go to the essential oils and grab some peppermint and dilute it and put it on their spine, or if my daughter starts having menstrual cramps, that she grabs clary sage and dilutes and puts that on her tummy. That is the first step. If you get a mosquito bite, there are certain a weed in quotation growing in the grass. I think it's plantain. I might be wrong with the name, but you grab that leaf and you rub it between your hands and you put it on the bite. So that you do that first rather than going to the medicine cupboard and grab whatever pharmaceutical creams you might have in there. And I think doing that, I think we will walk alongside, hand in hand with Haumea and Ceres as well as another planetary body to do with how the earthly resources that we have and how if we treat her with respect, then we'll receive abundance back. Yes. So moving on from Haumea, we're going to talk about a one of the aspects of this Grand Cross. So the Grand Cross is that there's four planetary bodies that are making a 90-degree angle with each other, and the one opposite, the Sun, Moon, sitting in Virgo, the opposite of that right now is Chiron, and Chiron is sitting at 32 degrees Pisces. So Pisces, another sign that is more than 30 degrees. It takes the sun longer than 30 days to travel through Pisces. Hence, Chiron considered 32 degrees. But how is this Chiron energy playing out?
Yeah, of course, the other parts of that grand cross are Pluto and Jupiter, and we haven't touched on them today, but suffice to say that Pluto is power and Jupiter is amplification. So everything we're talking about is just magnified with Jupiter, and underneath it there's a current of tremendous power. The best way I look at that from a power analogy is to think about the tides and the currents that sometimes when we go swimming, of course, in the sea, it may look calm, but there's a very strong rip current underneath, or even in rivers, you get the same thing. So Pluto's power is not often seen, but it is very evidently felt, even if we don't acknowledge it. So I haven't touched on those two, but I did want to talk about Chiron here, because it's the most important part of those three energies of Pluto, Jupiter, Chiron. I thought Chiron's the one to zero in on. On July the 25th, 2025, again, a plug for a previous podcast, but we released a reading called Fight, Flight, or Delight, Cancer, New Moon, and Memories. And in that, we discussed Chiron at great depth and great length. But the cliff notes is that when we emerge from the womb, this is all of us. So this is a unique and shared human experience. And therefore this energy resides in the human collective, in the consciousness of humans. When we emerge from the womb, this is the mother's womb, and no one uh, had avoided this process. We are largely unconscious. When the umbilicus is cut, this is the Chiron, the concept of Chiron. When the umbilicus is cut by the healthcare system, it imprints on our physiology a memory that we are cut off from source. Remember that we are completely and totally infants at this stage. Within hours or even less time, this process of the umbilicus is cut. That cutting sows in our awareness, even though we don't acknowledge it. It sows in our bodies and imprints on us in our physiology a seed of separation anxiety. And it's sown into our bodies from the moment of birth because we are cut off literally from the source of our sustenance. Of course, a baby does not survive without that umbilical cord, but the umbilicus or the umbilical cord, of course, is attached to the mother. And the mother, in this case, is the source of sustenance. So we juxtapose the mother for being the source of all energy and sustenance in life. And of course, the infant baby is reliant on and dependent upon the mother, so that when that umbilical is cut, Chiron energy activates, but we're not aware of it. So we have this imprint that's in us from the moment of birth, and it's called separation anxiety. Now, that separation, that physiological imprint, as far as the Chiron archetype goes, that lays dormant in us physically and spiritually and etherically. It lays dormant in us until such time as we as an individual, and there's no specific time frame for this because this could happen anytime, could happen multiple times during our lifetimes, but we are confronted by an existential crisis in our own lives where we are faced with overwhelming odds. We get swamped, we get triggered by something major in our lives, usually a loss, a redundancy, a death, a divorce. It's a dramatic event. I think you get the idea. These are what we call Scorpio events, which interestingly, we spoke at length about Scorpio being part of the three phases of water in our previous podcast of October 6, 7, time and tide wait for no one. That Scorpio event or events, as the case may be for us. Some people are beset with trauma. Some people only have one or two major events in their lives. But for sure, if you live long enough, something will happen that will trigger this dormant separation anxiety. What most people do as a knee-jerk reaction to strong emotional events in their lives is that we can begin to indulge the idea that we've been abandoned. We can feel like life has been unfair to us. We can feel like there is no God, there is no meaning. How can this be happening to me? Woe is me. That is a very typical response to major trauma in our lives, particularly if we don't have any spiritual practice in our lives or meditation or mindfulness practice that we can fall back on. So we've got this umbilicus experience. It imprints on us right from infancy. It lays as a seed dormant, a separation anxiety. It gets triggered by a Scorpio type event. We feel and react to it like we've been abandoned. And we're going through this huge loss. And what we do is unwittingly invoke when we start to almost berate life and say what has happened. And it's very interesting. Even those that don't have a relationship with what they would call a God often will blame God for their deepest problems or blame whatever it is, something out there. But when we're going through that process of falling into victimization and reacting very strongly to this triggering, and this Chiron energy has now been, that was laying dormant in us, is now it's rising up into our consciousness. We unwittingly invoke the Christ on the cross matrix when he said, "Father, why hast thou forsaken me?" which is the opening line of Psalm 22. That phrase expresses the deepest sense of abandonment and despair that even in that case Jesus went through. Christ expressed for humanity exactly the experience that I'm talking about here with Chiron. But here's the thing. That Chiron energy, as real as it feels, it's actually one of the challenges that we must overcome on the spiritual path. When you peel it back, we were never cut off from source. Even though our bodies are screaming because of this umbilicus experience embedding in us as a infusing in us as a reality, when we look at it with the cold light of consciousness, we realize that it's not real. It's a ghost that must be overcome with consciousness, with awareness. And we realize that when we reconnect with our heart space, when we put our feet in the ground, when we align with Mother Earth's rhythms, just like Haumea is telling us, sharing with us, imploring us to do, when we reconnect with our inner guidance system, the number 9, the hermit, and we go inwards, when we activate our intuition via meditation and mindfulness practice, when we do these things, we can pass through and disintegrate the Chiron energies and the grip that it has on us to the extent that it never affects us again. So Chiron is actually one of those almost existential, what would I call it? It's a situation that we must confront in order to become fully awake and aware. This is one of the things that we must overcome in our lives. In our June 11 podcast, June 11, 2025 podcast called Eureka Sliding Doors Open, Ophiuchus Full Moon, we spent a lot of time talking about this as well and how to use the Ophiuchian energy to help you get perspective on what's actually happening when you go through a Chiron type experience. In the dissolution of Virgo's institutions of work and healthcare, if we pull this back to the context of Chiron sitting opposite and the Virgo energies is relating to this dissolution and this changing and this rapid paradigm shifts in the areas of Virgo's domains of work and health and well-being. When we think about that and the institutions of work and healthcare, that often think about work. And as I said, one of these major Scorpio experiences that we often lead to a feeling of hopelessness and abandonment and loss and cut off, and how could that be, is redundancy. You know, we get cut off from work. Work is the source of sustenance for us. And of course, healthcare, it's pretty obvious that we have a physical event that manifests in our life and we feel like, what is going on? And we can enter into very dark times. Well, this is this Chiron experience. We have not been abandoned is the key. We absolutely have not, but we must tap into our heart and we must tap into and be grounded with Mother Earth. And that's the lesson of Haumea. And it is only then that we can connect with Source, with our soul families, with our guides. And if we don't do that, see, that's one path, that's one positive reaction. But if we have people in our lives that are reacting to a major event in the area of work or well-being, a major disruption, a natural reaction is to fall into victimhood. And for the collective, with the changes that are happening in the areas of AI and robotics and machine learning and genetically modified and mRNA technologies and all of these control structures that are happening in these areas of health and work, there are people out there who will think that we have been consigned to live on a prison planet and they will abandon all hope. They will let go of any hope and connection that they possibly had and just put their hands up and just allow it all to happen. They will allow the digital technocracy to take over. But again, it's not true. It's just an illusion. And that is the lesson of Chiron.
Sometimes very hard to get my head around that it is an illusion to work on. And yeah, definitely being outside and feet on the ground, looking after the strawberries that we spoke about last time and the raspberries and everything else that I would like to grow in our garden. Taking that time out. I've been holding sound baths using crystal bowls here at home. And last week I had two mums and they were just like the importance, especially for primary caregivers, to take an hour out for you to recalibrate to you, and whether that is going to a sound healing or a bath or being out in the garden, going for a beach walk or a river walk, just taking that time and ideally just being present, not listening to an audiobook, not being on the phone with your parent that you haven't spoken to, but just taking that time out, listening to the birds, watching the sunset. And perhaps your guides find your busy mind quiet enough to give you a few tips and tricks of what steps to take and move forward. So important. So we are going to talk about, so last time we spoke about Hades and Kronos as the planetary bodies, and they are similar energies as Pluto and Saturn, but today we are talking about Zeus. So Zeus is another one of those. And David, please tell us which one Zeus is related to and how this one plays out this time.
Well, Zeus is Jupiter. So Zeus, Jupiter, again, the Greco-Roman, slightly different versions of it, but we're getting to the final sort of piece of this that I wanted to bring through in terms of this reading. As I said, we haven't touched on all 9 planetary bodies at play, but Zeus is one of the most important and a good way to end this interpretation. in our podcast of January 13, 14, 2025, called Gemini Full Moon, Governance and Grand Cross, we deep dived into Zeus as a planetary archetype. But again, we'll do the cliff notes. Zeus is related to governance, not government, but governance. The word governance comes from the Greek word kubernein and the Latin word or Latin verb gubernare, both of which mean to steer or to pilot. The words was adapted, or the word governance was adapted into Old French as gouverner, and then in Middle English when it came to mean to control, to influence, or to regulate. So its meaning was changed, and that's very important in the context of what we're talking about here with these changes in Virgo's domain of healthcare and work. A lot of it is around control structures. So, and the governance of those systems is very, very important, especially AI and robotics and big data, and especially healthcare. So the term governance is today often interchangeably used with the word government. Zeus relates to governance, not government. Government is Saturn and Pluto, just to be clear. So the two words governance and government have very distinct meanings. Government is a set of control structures established by laws, regulations, and constitutions that are enshrined or inculcated through Saturn's institutions and Pluto's power. Governance, Zeus, the archetype, is a behavioral relationship between, or describes a behavioral relationship between the governed and the governors, or the guardians. It refers to the process of decision making and how decisions are implemented in the context of a relationship between the governed and the governors, or the guardians. One system of governance that we have today, which I think is beginning to age and fall apart and is showing that it's run its course, is that of command and control. Dictatorial decisions made in the typical triangle or pyramid type structure where quite literally just a few people sit in governance at the top of a pyramid, however that is and wherever it manifests, making decisions for everybody else, the governed. And in fact, we just did our local voting here. And what alarmed us, and we were talking about this, you and I, was that in our part of the world where we live, there's 45,000 people, most of whom are registered voters. But yet I added up the votes for the mayor, who's in one of these most powerful positions at the top of this pyramid for local body decisions, and only 15,000 people voted for the top two candidates out of about 40,000 eligible voters. Yet that to me is a horrendous situation of governance that has gone completely wrong. So in fact, what you have is a minority governing the majority. When you think about if that mayor, if that individual who's got the power of authority over a lot of decisions that affect us in the household, water, rates, the way that the garbage is collected, all sorts of things, he and maybe 3 or 4 or 5 others in his cabinet are making decisions that affect 45,000 people, and there were only 15,000 people that voted. In fact, that individual only got 9,500. The other 6 odd thousand went to somebody else, the second person who was unsuccessful. But this is what we're getting at: is that governance is a structure, and today it means command and control in these dictatorial decisions. But the other form of governance, and I think one that we will move towards as we move out of the age of Pisces and the age of materialism and darkness into the age of enlightenment, is in the golden age is that we will have crowdsourced, bottom-up, consensus, groundswell decisions. And in fact, one of the things, again, that we were talking about was why can't we have every decision that affects usually what they call the collective commons, which is water and land and air and roads and airports and bridges and those types of things. Why can't that be done by a referendum? Most people today have a phone, and the governance structure is a small team. Sure, they may be elected, they may be very skilled individuals, but their purpose is to come up with ideas, not to make decisions. And then they push those ideas out through a digital referendum that might be open for 2 or 3 weeks on a phone or online, and a decision has to be made where a certain threshold of the community has voted. It might be 60, 70 or 80%. And unless we get to that point, then we keep going and keep refining it. That is possible. See, that's an idea that time may come as we move into the age of Aquarius and we think about the governance over the domains of healthcare and the labour force, for example. So governance is the structures and the processes that allow a social organisation to steer itself. And that can range from self-regulation to centralised control with respect to the collective commons, which is what I touched on before. Those are the shared resources of Haumea, of Earth, of typically water, air, earth, healthcare, and education. So Zeus, as an archetype, is asking us, relating to governance as opposed to government. Zeus is asking us right now, in this time of transition and the time of dissolution of some of these big institutional structures of healthcare and work, forced by AI, by robotics, by automation, by outsourcing, by genetic engineering, by GMOs, by gene editing, by mRNA technologies, by big data, apps. An AI has all of our health data loaded into the cloud somewhere, and we're getting push notifications that it's time for your vaccine, or it's time for your heart drugs to be changed, or it's time for your whatever it is. You can see how we can get easily plugged into the healthcare system via our phones, via smartphones and big data. That's all coming. That's a major disruption to the area of Virgo. So who's governing that? That's the question. That's what Zeus is asking here. And we need to be creative about how we respond to that. And Zeus is saying, be leaders in your own way. Confront and overcome any sense of abandonment and loss and helplessness, Chiron, by connecting firstly to Mother Earth, Haumea, and put her at the center of any plans, programs, or technologies we adopt with respect to healthcare and the way we work. And this isn't a plug for sustainability or anything like that, but we like, and this has been hijacked, but I think those listening will have the discernment to understand what I'm getting at here, is we need to understand the circular economy, which is that everything that we're consuming comes firstly by extracting something from the earth, which is then refined and produced and manufactured and played with and often altered too, before we get to use it. This is the inorganic processes we're talking about here. So once those inorganic products that are everywhere, the glass jars, the packaging, the plastic bottles, everything, the cardboard boxes, all of it, once we've used that in the circular economy again, in ideas for thinking about governance, is reuse and repair and recycling. One of the things, again, that we've talked about is I came from a much bigger city to a smaller city. In the big city I was in, you could recycle pretty much everything. But here, in a smaller city, there are items that we cannot recycle. And so they go straight into the rubbish. What a tragedy. But that ultimately comes back to the governance structures, because that mayor and the local council have decided, for whatever reasons, that that's not a priority for them to be able to provide for households the ability to recycle things like batteries and certain types of plastics, and that we can't, you've got to take the lid off a plastic bottle and only put the bottle in the recycling here, but you can't put the plastic lid, so the plastic lid goes into the rubbish, but the plastic bottle itself gets recycled. These are crazy things, right? This is all to do with governance, and this is what Zeus is bringing to our attention at this time.
We could talk about that for hours. It's such a touchy subject for me because reusing, in my opinion, is better than recycling. So I'm saving all these big yogurt containers and I'll take them to the school because then at least they get reused, whether they store paints in them or whatever. I'm sure it drives you crazy, but that's my reason. I just putting stuff in the rubbish. It's whew, because it just ends up in a big bag and a big pile and it becomes a problem for generations way later. I was listening to a really interesting podcast earlier today. Some of you might listen to her as well, Mel Robbins, and she was interviewing a doctor. I don't know, studied something. His name is Todd Ross, and he shared a stat that he was talking about Twitter, now known as X, that 80% of the content on there is written by 10% of its users. And I think you could almost apply that to other aspects of life as well. It's the people with the loudest voice. You just assume that everyone else has this similar opinion. And he's written a book called Collective Illusions. It's about conformity and complicity. And his message really was that if we take small steps to get back to our authentic self, you go out for dinner. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I think it is just important that, the governance and standing by your own authenticity, for me, it is related. If you go out for dinner and you haven't had a glass of an alcoholic beverage for months, and a friend you haven't seen for months, they go, "Oh, I'm having a beer. What are you having?" And you want to say, "Oh no, I'm not drinking tonight," or "I'm having a break." But because you feel like you have to conform, you'll just like go, "Oh, I'll have the same as you." Whereas if you had stood your ground and gone, "I'm not drinking tonight," perhaps your friend would have gone, "Oh, thank goodness, I don't want to drink either." So if we stand together and go, "I'm not satisfied with the way that recycling is being handled in this city," perhaps your neighbor next door will go, "I agree with you." Like I'm going to call out the city, Nelson City, because there is a public place where there is a bin, a refuse bin, and next to it is a recycle bin. So you're like, sweet, people with their empty Coke cans or empty whatever it is they put in the recycling, and then their sushi wrapper or their other rubbish they put in the rubbish bin side by side. And I was sitting outside last week and there was this rubbish truck, normal rubbish truck, and it picks up both recycling and rubbish and it goes into the same truck. So why even bother with the recycling? Why do you make us think that the governance of this city cares about recycling by having this separate system when it all goes to the same place anyway? But if none of us call it out, if none of us call our mayor or council people, then it will just continue and it will just be like, well, then why even bother? So I think we all have a voice and we need to find our authenticity to say what is important to us, because you might find that what is important to you is actually important to a lot of people, but we're living in this illusion that certain things are important when it's actually the other thing. Thank you so much, David, for sharing your wisdom and your explanation of all these beautiful energies coming together at this new moon. A recap, we've been talking about this new moon in Virgo where 5 planets are coming together. We didn't speak about all of them, but they are also making this grand cross with Jupiter in Gemini, Chiron in Pisces, and Pluto in Capricorn. We've highlighted our previous podcast where we will deep dive into these energies. So if you have some questions, go there first. If you would like to know where the planetary bodies were at your time of birth, hit us up for a chat or a natal reading. You can find us on Spotify, Audible, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast, and of course, all the videos on YouTube. Any parting messages, David?
Just one briefly is that fifth energy in the stellium is Arcturus, and Arcturus is a protective energy. So source consciousness, universal intelligence is reminding us that no matter what we're going through, we are being overseen by higher, more benevolent forces. That there is absolutely outside of our reality of this human existence on terra firma, Arcturus, which is a benevolent energy, is part of this new moon. So he is watching over us. So we're okay, but we do have a part to play. So I just wanted that came to me just as we were wrapping up. I thought, yeah, I could have touched on Arcturus, so I thought I'd touch on that and just introduce that. And the final part of this was Vulcanus, which we didn't touch on at all. But Vulcanus is in a square and to the new moon, and the Vulcanus energy is explosive. If we think about underwater, if we think of water being a metaphor for emotions and consciousness, and Vulcanus representing an underwater volcano, then there's potential for a lot of these changes again, specifically in the areas of Virgo's domains of healthcare and work, which feed well-being. If we don't deal with these things, if we don't tackle the governance, if we don't reconnect with Earth, if we don't understand the myth and the lessons of Haumea, if we don't understand that the Chiron abandonment and loss, that we're not alone, if we don't get that actually Arcturus is looking out for us, but we've got a role to play, then that Vulcanus energy, together with Jupiter and Pluto, says that there's a dark path here, and it's explosive, and it's not great. So these readings for us is the cosmic intelligence communicating to us messages that we get to interpret. So other astrologers will have different interpretations, and this is ours. And it's overwhelmingly positive if we are proactive in our response to it. And that proactivity comes back to awareness, awake and aware. And the more aligned we are with the Earth's rhythms and the rhythms of the cosmos, the more awake and aware we will be, the more aligned we are with not only our own divine design, but the divine design of this whole structure that we're a part of. If you think about those that are following the 12 sign astrology, they wouldn't be hearing any of this. What they'll be hearing about is an interpretation of a new moon, probably in Libra. Very, very different. And there won't be any discussion about the Grand Cross or Haumea or Arcturus or any of it. And therefore you kind of think, based on what you were just saying before there, Sana, about this echo chamber, is that there's an echo chamber over there in the 12 sign astrology, and it's totally and completely misaligned with what's actually going on, which means that there are people out there who are listening to astrology interpretations that are basically being fed a load of nonsense. And that's where I kind of like to leave this.
Thank you. Yes. Come have a discussion with us. Until next time, Ngā mihi.
Namaste.